Hello everyone and welcome to another session of AP Human Geography Review with Mr. Elrod. Today we're going to be talking about languages. This is actually by way of request from one of my YouTube subscribers, Go Forth. They asked for me to talk about languages. Not exactly sure what they wanted me to talk about, so I figured I would just go over some of the basics with languages, how we categorize some of the different languages and group them together, and talk you through a little bit of that. So anyhow, first of all, when we talk about languages, we categorize languages in the world in a variety of different ways, moving from historically the common denominators of languages, and then we move through really to present day. But then we can also talk about extent of geographic area that a language takes up, and we could also talk about the number of people who speak a particular language. So when we talk about the different categories of languages and how we bring them together, the largest category of languages is called the language family. And we talk about the language family. This is really the very first known origin or the predecessor of languages and groups of languages. And a lot of times the language family is going to start in a prehistoric age because it was spoken before we had recorded history. And so we kind of have an idea of where the origins might have been, or a general idea, but sometimes we just don't know where those particular origins are. Especially if you look, I mean, even if you look at the history of the Indo-European language, there's still arguments over where exactly that originated from. And again, when we talk about language family, this is going to be the largest grouping of languages, which means that it's going to have the largest number of people who are included in that particular category. And we may not be able to see some of the similarities between the languages, but a lot of it has to do with similar vocabulary and ways of expression, things along those lines. We move down to the language branch. This is where we can begin to see historically how languages are related, and we can begin to see much more common relationships between the different languages, how they're spoken, how they're expressed, and things along those lines. Then we move down into the group. And within the group, the language group, we are able to see much more direct connections. I think about the Germanic language group within the Indo-European language family, and I think about English and German and some of the similarities between English and German, because English is directly derived between a combination of French and German. So anyhow, you see some of the direct connections and similarities between those different languages. You can see historically how they're related to each other. You can see the movements of the people as they move from place to place and language begins to change. So when we talk about language, again, we're talking about the specific language a particular people speak today, and of course it's going to be specific to a group of people and their geographic area, and you're going to have within that language particular variations of that language. And when we talk about these variations, it's referring to a dialect. When we talk about dialect, this is going to be the most specific form of a language. You're just going to cover the smallest geographic area of any of these. And again, it's going to be very specific to that group of people, especially in terms of their vocabulary, maybe the way they pronounce things, things along those lines. One thing to keep in mind is that as we move down this continuum, one of the things we're going to find is that the number of people who speak this particular language or group of languages is going to decrease. And it's also typically going to be spoken over a smaller geographic area. And so again, it becomes more and more specific. It becomes fewer and fewer people are speaking as we move through. So if we talk about maybe the way we look at a language family and break it down, we have what's called the Indo-European language family. Now this little tree right here, maybe it's not 100% what we typically think of in terms of the languages and the way they're referred to. Anyway, so we have like the Indo-European language family, which then breaks off into all these different language branches. Again, I was talking about the Germanic language branch over here, and you can see how that kind of moves down to all these different forms of Germanic. This over here would be the Romance language families, the Romance language branch, and then you break it on down into the different modern day European languages. And then you see over here, how this West Germanic comes up over here to this Anglo-Frisian, which merges with some French and Middle English, and then becomes our modern day form of English. So within this Indo-European family, you can see there are lots of different language groups that emerge. Probably one of the most important things to think about here is really diffusion. You think about the space that these different languages take up and how they distribute themselves across the earth. And you can see how some of these modern day languages are a part of some of these older language branches and groups and things like that. And when we talk about language families, I've looked at a couple different sources, and here are the ones that I've seen the sources talk about. Now, it's not really important that you memorize all these different language families. However, one of the things I would encourage you to do maybe is just to think in your mind geographically where we would find these types of language families. As you move down this list, hopefully in your mind you can begin to picture where these particular places are. Now, if we look over here to the other, of course, these are going to be really small particular language families that did not diffuse very widely, or for whatever reason these people were highly isolated. Maybe a group of people that definitely know for a variety of reasons are the Basque people living in the Pyrenees Mountains, northeastern Spain. They speak a particular, a very unique language, and actually a very unique cultural group. They're believed to be some of the last remaining historically pure Europeans before you had the Germanic invasions, which conquered the Roman Empire. So anyway, so that might be an interesting group of people to look at and also remember, not just for language reasons, but and cultural reasons, but also for political reasons, because of the Basque separatist movement, things along those lines. Now, as far as language families, probably one of the most important for you to know is the Indo-European language family, because of course that's where English comes from, and more than likely that's if you see a question, that might be the one that you see on the test. This right here is just a map that shows a variety of different language families, and well, actually, it says language families, but we would call these language groups and language branches as we see them across the world, and really just to give you a visual geographic view of where the different languages and things are distributed around the world. So pause the video maybe for a little bit, take a few minutes to glance at this map and just see where some of these things are located and see how we have the groupings of these different languages, and think about the movement of people historically and where they've gone and those types of things. Now, another thing to keep in mind as we talk about globalization, one of the things we talk about is culture and globalization. We think about how, potentially, language we have fewer and fewer languages that are surviving over time because of globalization and things along those lines. So we'll see, in the future whether or not we have more languages, fewer languages, as our world comes closer together. Just a couple language facts or factoids for us to keep in mind. When we talk about the largest number of people who speak a language, Chinese is going to come in at number one. It does have the largest number of native speakers. One thing to keep in mind about Chinese is that it has a variety of different dialects. In China, the most widely spoken of those is Mandarin. So if you're talking about Chinese, more than likely you're talking about Mandarin Chinese being spoken, with a variety of other dialects being spoken in the remainder of the country. The second largest, of course, is going to be Hindi. Of course, these are the Chinese and Hindi spoken in the countries of the two largest populations of the world. So it lends itself to that. When we look at, now this is one of the things that my students often get confused, is that Spanish is actually the third largest language spoken in the world, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that Spanish is spoken in Latin America, where you have countries that are undergoing population booms, or they're growing populations, and so you have a fairly large number of Spanish speakers in the world. And then it's actually English coming in at fourth in terms of the number of native speakers. Now, if you talk about when you talk about native and second native speakers and people who use English as a second language, English is going to be the most widely spoken. That's because it is our current global lingua franca, that global language that we talk about in our culture unit. English is the language of modern-day economics, politics, and education. In fact, there was an article out a couple of years ago that was talking about how about 80% or so of information on the internet is in English. And so, even if one has access to the internet, English is still vitally important, because in order to understand the information that's on the internet, more than likely you're going to need to understand and be able to read English. And so English is becoming more and more important as we move forward. Now, some people will argue that with the advent of things like Google Translate, your cell phone, which you can speak into and have it translate for you, we might just actually move away from that, and everybody just continues to speak their traditional language, and we communicate through translators. Who knows how that's going to how that will play out in the future, but it's definitely something to keep in mind. So anyway, hope you found this to be helpful. Again, always subscribe and like my videos. If you have any suggestions or comments, please leave those below. And good luck to you as you study for your test.